everything's fundamentally linked. But what we found, and what other scientists have found as well, is that the Indian summer monsoon has become a bit difficult of late. Basically what's happened is it's become a bit more difficult to predict. Because we're changing our climate a lot, that means that the way that heat is distributed around the Earth has changed from how it has been before. And that basically destabilises our normal weather patterns and our normal climate systems. And it also destabilises the normal way that the oceans and the atmosphere interact together to make our weather systems. Now you might think, why does this affect me? I don't live in India. But in fact, it really does affect you. So first of all, I've got some statistics I can tell you. So the Indian summer monsoon has started changing, and it becomes more and more problematic each year. So I can give you an example. In August 2018, the monsoon arrived and it was extremely strong. It was very intense, and that means that it delivered a lot of rain over a short space of time. And that resulted in flooding that left 483 people dead and affected 5.4 million people on the Indian subcontinent. In June 2019, that's this year, there was flooding in 11 states. 1,200 people were killed and millions of people were displaced. Now, why do we care about that? Well, first of all, they're humans, so we care about them. Also, many people in the UK are from Indian heritage, and it's their families that are being affected. And obviously, the UK owes a debt to India because of our colonial past, so we care for those reasons. But also, if there's crop failure, flooding, famine in India, that's a huge number of people who are affected. We import a lot of food from there, we import resources and materials from there, we import goods. We also, because they have such a big impact on the global economic system as well, when there's problems in the Indian subcontinent, it really affects all of us. So, and in the future, the more flooding and the more famines and the more disasters there are in places like India, that will really cause a movement of people as well, a mass migration. And mass migrations also can upset the basically geopolitical stability of the area. So all of these things really, really do affect us in our everyday lives and will increasingly in the future. And all of this just stems from the fact that we are pumping so much carbon dioxide into the atmosphere that is warming the whole planet. And this is going to affect us more and more as it goes on. Now is the time that we have to make a change in this country and around the world. So you guys, all of us, are responsible for grilling our politicians, voting for people who are going to make a difference, and for making responsible choices in our daily lives with our dollar. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Marianne. So our next speaker is an applied nuclear physicist and radio ecologist, so he's well placed to talk about some of the technological aspects of the emergency. Tom, are you ready? In a second, we have Dr. Tom Woodroof. Woodroof?
Yes, thank you very much, Josh. Yeah, as Josh said, I'm Dr. Tom Woodroof, and I've just finished my PhD in applied nuclear physics and radio ecology. I was basically using gamma ray detectors to look at how radioactive fallout from Chernobyl and Fukushima moved through soils. It was very, very interesting, and it's obviously environmental science related, but it's not critical. You know, it's nowhere near as important as what these other guys have been talking about. And so I'm not going to talk about my research. What I am going to talk about, though, is our relationship to technology, and what frightens me is the government's attitude that our current plans for decarbonisation rely on technology which simply doesn't exist yet. Yeah, so as I said, you know, we've heard about climate change and the eradication of species and the potential for human conflict, and all of these are happening already, and each of them deserves an emergency response. But far from being brought under control, the drivers of these disasters, carbon emissions, habitat destruction, and soil loss, to name but a few, are actually accelerating. These are global problems, and they require a global response. No individual can do enough to stop this catastrophe. Many people hope, and this includes many in the government, many of our politicians, hope that scientists will save the day through research and development and innovation. But we are the very people saying that radical action has to happen now. The 2018 IPCC report explicitly calls for transformative system change. to limit warming to 1.5 degrees C. Not gradual change, not individual change, and certainly not the business as usual, which has cost us another precious year since this dire warning was issued. We may be committing hundreds of thousands of species to extinction by 2050. No nuclear fusion reactor has yet generated more energy than it takes to run, and the first commercial prototype is not expected to come online until the 2040s at the earliest. We will also have to wait decades before carbon dioxide removal technologies can be implemented at scale, and the IPCC described reliance on unproven CO2 removal technology as a major risk in the ability to limit warming to 1.5 degrees. Our only option is comprehensive emissions reductions now. Current plans rely on technological solutions that do not yet exist to justify reckless inaction in the present, with our government preferring to wait another generation to hit net zero. The idea that these problems will somehow become easier to solve in the future is a fantasy. The higher emissions climb, and the longer we delay taking on the interests which profit from destruction, the harder it will become to make the necessary changes. Our politicians say they accept that the climate emergency is the greatest challenge humanity has ever faced, and sometimes even claim that the UK is a world leader. But until their actions reflect the urgency and scale of the crisis, then things will continue to get worse rather than better. What is needed is a transformation of society and the way in which we understand progress. Technology alone cannot save us from the failures of a system based on infinite growth and the unsustainable use of natural resources. Whatever the result of the coming election, we call on the next government to face reality, face its responsibilities, and act immediately to protect the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. So we've got one more speaker for you, and then we'll go back to Emily for a summary and closure, and then we'll open up to a Q&A, so please stick around. So our final speaker, he's a zoologist at the Wild Work. I'll give you Iggy Fox.
Hi guys, so as he said, I'm a zoologist, and we don't usually wear lab coats. We usually wear field clothes and hiking boots like these, so that's what I've got on underneath. But I'm also here because I'm representing a lot of people from my network who are non-scientists. So my network is the Wild Work, Wildlife and Wilderness Workers Network, and that means zoologists like myself, but it also means ecologists, all sorts of biologists, it means veterinarians and veterinary scientists, anti-poaching rangers, and all sorts of people doing grassroots ecological restoration. So we're the kind of people who are trying to prevent biodiversity loss on the ground, and we're often the people who are on the front lines of that loss, often the people who are being murdered for it. So I have a picture here today of Paulino Guajajara, who's not a scientist, strictly speaking, but he is an earth protector. He was murdered on the 1st of November this year, defending indigenous lands in Brazil from illegal loggers, and was shot in the face in an ambush. That's one of 139 indigenous land defenders who've been murdered in Brazil alone this year. So I spent 7 years studying, researching and protecting nature as a wildlife conservationist. I worked directly in the field, monitoring ecosystems and labouring in wildlife rescue, environmental protection and ecological restoration. In that time we protected thousands of sea turtle nests from rising tides and poachers, but I still burnt my feet on the baking sands and held hatchlings in my hands, watching helplessly as they died of dehydration and hypothermia. In Mexico, we worked alongside indigenous people to mitigate hunting threats to wildlife. But when the forest saguaras kept drying up because of climate change and desperate mammals kept being driven into villages to find water, they came into conflict with people again. In Indonesia, we educated local women and children on the importance of their beautiful seas. We gathered hundreds of kilograms of plastic from the beaches with the local school children. But I watched helplessly on every dive as the corals slowly continued to bleach ever whiter in the warming water. In Bolivia, we patrolled a sanctuary and cared for rescued wildlife, but farmers set fires to clear the Amazon rainforest for beef pasture. and I continued to melt my boots, putting out forest fires with nothing more than a jerry can where the Bolivian government wouldn't help. 2 months after I left, a third of the sanctuary we were protecting was scorched black, and hundreds more animals were killed. No matter how many surveys I ran, no matter how many turtle nests I protected, no matter how many young people we educated in sustainability, the seas kept rising, the forests kept burning, plastic kept clogging the beaches, and our data kept showing that wildlife was being decimated. We did so much, but we scientists and field workers did not save the world, and we cannot do it alone. There are not enough of us, there is not enough funding, there are not enough jobs in my sector for this to keep going. We need transformative action from the government. Science alone is silence. For people to act on science's warnings and apply its solutions, its message needs shouting from the rooftops. And that is why we are here. After the declaration of rebellion on October 31st last year, I went to an NVDA training and joined the XR Snowflakes affinity group. I realized that within days my voice as an activist could be far more influential than it was as a scientist. I stopped fieldwork and I've deferred my masters to rebel full time. Thank you. And on August 13th, 6 of us snowflakes were arrested at the Brazilian embassy just round the corner over there for taking non-violent direct action to highlight an ecological and human rights emergency. We showed the truth that the Brazilian state has blood on its hands. The Brazilian state has blood on its hand, as do the extractive corporations that are destroying Amazonia, that are killing indigenous people, who are the best stewards of our natural world. They might not be scientists, but they protect over 80% of our world's remaining biodiversity, and they are facing genocide. And while the real criminals sit in plush offices, profiting from that genocide and ecocide, from obliterating the natural world that we depend on, those who resist their atrocities, like Paulo, are killed or thrown in jail. We took action here in London with relative privilege while 2,000 indigenous women marched on Brasilia to defend their lives and lands, 3 days after cattle ranchers set fires in the Amazon. And later the researchers showed our truths in scientific papers for all to see. Beyond a carefully prepared statement, I answered no comment to most questions in the police interview, but I did look the detective in the eye and tell him one thing. I'd quite like a future. Right now, my future is on fire, and in Brazil they're killing the firefighters. When the forest is ablaze in a valley, sometimes all it takes is a few extra snowflakes on the mountainside to trigger an avalanche that will put the fire out. Why should scientists not be one of those snowflakes? I don't want to be arrested or go to prison to risk my career in order to tell harsh truths. I work with young people under 18s, and criminal record could stop me doing that. But I'll face whatever I need to, because I need to look those young people in the eye and tell them that I've done something for their future. My actions aren't about sacrifice or arrest for the sake of it. I believe that knowing the science, we have no choice but to tell the truth and stick staunchly to our morals in the face of that truth. I won't stand by and watch the world burn, and I see a whole lot of good scientists here who won't either. Where politicians won't listen to papers, facts and figures, we must do what scientists are told not to do. Stand our ground, show emotion, defend our morality, and get in the streets with the rest of society to demand change. We must rebel. Rebel in love for this world and the wild. Rebel in compassion for the indigenous, local and First Nations people who are persecuted, protecting the ecosystems we all need to survive. Rebel in rage for the environmental defenders, murdered every week, our colleagues and siblings in the fight for life. Rebel in solidarity with the millions of young strikers who have stood out here demanding change and a safe future. Scientists, I want to thank you because I have been waiting for this sight since I joined on the Declaration of Rebellion on the 31st of October last year. What I see before me today are good people who refuse to be scribes of the apocalypse. Scientists who refuse to stand by with a clipboard and watch the world burn. Scientists for XR, I salute you. When the science demands action, I will see you again on the streets. Thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing your story. It's very inspiring. And can we just thank all of our speakers one more time before I pass the microphone back to Emily to summarise and close? Marianne has a quick announcement.
I just want to do a shout out because earlier I met a very concerned parent of one of the University of Manchester Young Greens. They're currently occupying the University of Manchester Finance Office and have been there since Tuesday because the University of Manchester have invested £12 million from their pension fund into fossil fuels against the wishes of their students. So please, I would really want to say that we're in solidarity with them, and that if you have any social media, please make noise about the University of Manchester occupation. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you all for being here. I know it's getting cold, it's late. Emily is going to summarise and close, and we're going to open up the floor to questions. So Emily, welcome back.
So I just want to reiterate, I mean, I'm sure you've all experienced just how powerful those presentations were, made by scientists who, quite frankly, ought to be in a field or in a lab or at a desk or at a bench doing their work. There are so many people here who've given up their careers either today or ongoing in order to be out here protesting. This community it takes a lot for this community to have built, and people are coming together and giving their time and giving their expertise, because this is the most important thing, actually, that any of us can do now. And I know a lot of us feeling that, like, everything else, our everyday lives, is kind of pointless if we're not actually out here fighting this, because otherwise what else is there? So I just want to thank everyone who spoke today so powerfully. So, you know, anyone who says that science is just about the cold, hard facts, well, the thing is, the cold, hard facts, they didn't do anything, did they? We've been saying the cold, hard facts for a long time. So scientists are human beings. Scientists have emotion. Just because we communicate historically the facts quite sort of analytically doesn't mean that behind the people who are saying those facts are not real human beings with hearts, with families, with homes, people who don't want the world to be in this desperate, devastating position that we're in. And I think what we've really seen here is a whole group of scientists, those who've spoken, those who haven't, those who are here bringing their their hearts and their emotion to actually the real feelings behind this. Because that's the problem, is that those of us who know the truth generally tend to be those of us who've been trained through our discipline to actually simply report on it. But actually what we're seeing now is we're needing something more than that. We're needing people to take action. We're needing people to express the real devastation of what the lack of action right now could mean. I also want to take a moment to just acknowledge the hunger strikers. We've been past 3 hunger strike areas, locations today. The hunger strikers are actually really showing us the future that we could be going towards. So not only are they putting their lives, their health, their physical and mental health on the line because of how serious this is, but they're actually representing what our futures could be like. Because it's all very easy to say, okay, well, you know, hurricanes, droughts, floods, you know, it happens over there. Starvation, it happens over there. Lack of fresh water, it's happening over there in other countries. But this is something that will directly or indirectly impact all of us going forward. There are reports to say that even here in the City of London, within the next 5 or 10 years, we could be facing issues with our fresh water supplies. Within the next, certainly by the middle of the century, 2040, 2050, as I said earlier, homes across the UK could be being flooded on a yearly basis. There are already farmers up in Yorkshire who've not been able to plant their crops for next year because their fields are underwater. The cost of potatoes has already gone up This is one of our staple crops here in the UK. Studies have come out recently to show that due to a combination of climate change and land degradation, as we move towards 2040, towards 2050, up to 10% of our crops across the globe, global average, there'll be a 10% reduction in our food crops. In some areas of the world, that's going to be a 50% reduction. By the year 2050, that's pretty much tomorrow in terms of our society's future. And of course, we rely on these lands, we rely on these places to be able to eat. Another study has shown that by the year 2040, the risk of multiple crop failures across multiple countries in the world, some of our most important crop-producing areas, due to extreme weather conditions because of climate change, those risks are going to go up by a factor of 3. If we get multiple crop failure in any one season, we are looking at a situation here in the UK where we do not have enough food on our supermarket shelves, or where the food has gone up in price so much that those who are poorer in our society cannot afford to eat it. So we're looking at really real impacts, both on us here in the UK and indirectly through climate refugees, through all the hundreds of millions of people who are going to be displaced from their homes, who are going to be seeking refuge. And what are we going to do as a society? What are we going to do when it's them or us? What are we going to do when it's about how do we survive? That's what Kate referred to in her talk. So you've heard about the feedback loops. You've heard about the fact that we simply don't know when we're going to be committed to irreversible warming. The thing is, in science, what we know around the climate and ecological crisis is really frightening. But what's even more frightening is what we know we don't know. Because we don't know at what point it's going to become irreversible. We don't know at what point we're committed. We don't know at what point the very unstable ice sheet in the Antarctic is going to crumble, committing us to meet. We don't know when, and we don't know what will happen next. But we know that things will get faster, and at some point it will get much faster. And we've heard about all the impacts of this. We've heard about the health crisis. We haven't heard much about the health crisis, but the Lancet has said that global warming, climate change is the biggest threat to health of the 21st century. There are countless senior figures across the globe who are telling us, figures from the UN, figures from the World Health Organization, who are saying we have to act now. It's the children and the elderly that are most at risk. We're seeing warming temperatures, which mean that infectious diseases are becoming more and more prevalent in other countries, and there's incidences of those infectious diseases actually entering here in the UK. We can no longer close our eyes and say it's happening somewhere else and it's not our problem. And we can no longer close our eyes to the fact that the governments say they're acting, because they're not. Internal reviews have shown that what they're doing is woeful. It's been compared to, it's been likened to Dad's Army, the government's approach to this climate crisis. The governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, says we're heading towards financial instability, and by the time we get there, it's going to be too late. We need to listen to the people who are telling us that we have to act now. We cannot wait till 2050. Even if we got to net zero by 2050, we only have the 50% chance of staying below 1.5 degrees. That is absolutely terrifying and insane that we're even thinking about net zero by 2050 being enough. If we want a 2/3 chance, a 66% chance of staying below 1.5 degrees, and by the way, this magic 1.5 degrees, it really is that serious. If we go above 1.5, the threats just get worse and worse. But if we want to stay below 1.5, to have a 2/3 chance of being able to do that, at the current trajectory that we're on, we're going to run out of all carbon that we're allowed to burn to stay within that within the next 8 years. That's 8 years until we have to stop entirely, or we're going to go potentially over 1.5. Are we actually moving anywhere towards getting down to zero by that time? Absolutely not. We're not doing anything like that about it. The government are constantly saying, oh, well, terrestrial emissions are going down. Well, can I just clarify, because it's something that we get asked a lot. Firstly, why this is irrelevant, and secondly, why it's not true. Well, firstly, why it's not true, actually, is that, yes, terrestrial emissions have gone down a tiny bit, but that's mostly because we've moved from from burning coal to burning oil. That's a sort of blip in a lowering of the emissions, but it will not, doesn't mean we keep going down. If anything, it's going to then go back up. if we don't do anything about it. Secondly, we already, on home terrestrial emissions per head, we already emit twice as much as we should per head in terms of the global carbon budget due to our population size and how much we emit. Yes, it's only 1.5%, but we only have 0.8% of the global population. But most importantly is that our terrestrial emissions don't even include aviation or shipping. And those are the things that emit arguably most of the carbon. So it's ludicrous for us to be saying, oh, well, our terrestrial emissions are going down or they're fine. But actually, there's a huge, much bigger problem than that, which is that actually most of our emissions that are tied to the UK are through what's called embedded emissions. Emissions in what we drink, in what we eat, what we import from other countries. Stuff that's been manufactured abroad and we buy and we consume over here. We import over 50% of our food, 70 to 80% of our fruit and vegetables. Look at our fast fashion. We're constantly bringing stuff in from abroad that's being using up huge amounts of, pumping out huge amounts of carbon when they're manufactured and huge amounts again when they're flown over on aeroplanes. Not to mention the fact that the government is also investing huge amounts of money subsidising fossil fuel emissions in other countries that we then rely on. These are mostly in low to middle income countries across the world. And then if you look at the City of London, investments from city banks that have their headquarters, national and international headquarters in the City of London, make up 15% of the global carbon emissions. So if you think about it, here in the UK, it is completely ludicrous for people to be saying, oh, we're doing enough. Oh, it's not our problem. Oh, talk to China, talk to the States. Actually, we have a global responsibility to be doing so much more than we're doing. And if we don't do it, if we don't lead the way on this, or at least drag our heels behind somewhere on the way, we're not doing any of those things, then we are hurtling towards catastrophe. The current projections at current emission rates, which are not slowing, current emission rates are taking us towards 4 degrees by the end of the century. That's committing us to at least, the projections are around 1 metre of sea level rise, which is insane amounts, possibly up to 2 metres. And top climate researchers, climate scientists, the head of a climate research institute internationally has said that at a 4 degrees rise in temperature, it's very hard to see how our planet could hold more than 1 billion people because of lack of resources, as you heard from Kate, because of conflicts, because of societal collapse that would be around the loss of our infrastructure and the loss of our foodstuffs and competing for resources. And remember, towards the end of the century, we're heading towards a population of 8 or 9 billion. So the thing is, none of this is definite. None of this is like enough so far for the governments to have said, oh, well, it's 100% going to happen, therefore we'll do something. But that's not how science works. You've heard how science works. Science works on estimations, on probabilities and predictions, and a lot of the predictions, a lot of them are actually happening now faster than predicted. That's the problem. So global predictions have already given us the scenarios that we're heading towards. A lot of them are already unfolding faster than anyone could have predicted, not because the scientists get it wrong, but because this is an inherently unpredictable situation. We're looking at feedback loops, we're looking at things getting worse every day, and if we don't act now, we're simply going to make things worse. We don't know when that irreversible point is going to be hit. So every day that we stall, as Tom said, we've now waited a year since people have been talking about this at much higher intensity. Every single day, every single week, we're heading further and further towards catastrophe and towards a point where we're no longer going to be able to have time to do anything about it. But the fact is we can now do stuff about it. We can now act. We have got time to make a difference, but we have to act radically and we have to act now. And so the global emergency, the climate and ecological emergency, needs to be the top of political policies. It needs to be the thing that we are looking at with the current election coming up. This needs to be the head of everyone's thinking when it comes to who you're going to vote for, what you're going to do, and what we're going to demand. We can't just wait and vote for the party that comes up with the best policies. We have to take to the streets and we have to demand that policies are created in line with the 3 demands of Extinction Rebellion: to tell the truth about the climate and ecological emergency, to commit to net zero by 2025, and to call in a citizens' assembly to ensure that everyday people get the chance to make their own choices guided by the experts as to how we're going to deal with this crisis. It's going to need radical action. All of our lives are going to need to change, and they're going to need to change a lot. And it's up to us, surely, to be able to make those choices as to what our priorities are. So please, do what you can, get out onto the streets, force the government to listen to us. Let this not be a Brexit election. Let this be an election that takes seriously what is happening to the fate of us, to our children and to our planet. Thank you. If you want to hear more about who we are and what we do, if you want to hear more about the latest science, if you want to read the latest science, I would urge you to follow us on Facebook, Scientists for Extinction Rebellion, to follow us on Twitter @ScientistsX, and we've got a brand new website, scientistsforxr.earth, scientistsforxr.earth, and we've got all of the science laid out for you with all the references, fully resourced, so that you can read it for yourselves, share it, pass it on to your friends. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. We thank all our speakers once again. We've heard from Dr. Emily Grossman, Dr. Peter Spooner, Professor James Bullock, Professor Kate Jeffrey, Dr. Marianne Brett, Dr. Tom Woodroof, and Iggy Fox. Let's give them a warm thank you. If you hold tight for a couple of minutes, we're going to do a Q&A.
We need all the science, it's what we need.
So thank you for joining us at Trafalgar Square in London with the scientists of XR. If you want to learn more about the scientists of XR, please go to their Facebook page, which is Scientists for XR, or check out scientistsforxr.earth. Thank you very much for tuning in. Love, peace, respect, science and rage.
Blessed be. We got all the love, all that we need to change our world. Hallelujah. We got all the love, all that we need. Blessed be. Is we got all the love, all that we need to change our world. Hallelujah. We got all the love, all that we need. Blessed be.